Uh, let's get you scooting that way just a little bit. All right. All right. We are a few days into the month of Kartik. Kartik comes from Kritika, the constellation Pleiades in the sky that's prominent in the autumn time. Within our tradition, we generally don't call this holy month Kartik. We call it Damodar. We use both terms, but if you look in our calendar, our Panjika that's made for us, the name of the month is Damodar. All the months are named after forms of Vishnu, and so the name of this month is Damodar. And this month, the autumn month of Kartik / Damodar, is like a lot of months and a lot of times of the year in cultures all over the world. It's autumn, which joins summer and winter, which are the polar extremes. Summertime in India is excruciatingly hot. And then to top it all off, you get monsoons, which are unlike anything you experience here. The monsoon season is kind of like you walk outside and somebody's standing over you pouring a bucket of water over you. But wherever you go, somebody happens to be right above you pouring a bucket of water on you. It's like more than a shower. It's like standing in the shower, but like a really intense shower that's just everywhere for a huge chunk of the day. It's problematic. The rain itself is oppressive. Then you get the whole flooding situation, which is also seriously problematic. And then you have the monster humidity that goes with it, and you get like serious mosquito stuff happening. Not in the beginning, eventually, because when it's raining really intensely, the mosquitoes don't hit. Things have to settle a little bit, then the mosquitoes come. But that summertime of the year is serious. And in India, if you look at our saints, many of them pass away during the summer season because they lived outside under trees and such, and that time of the year was just such a formidable opponent to human life. It just desiccates everything and dries everything up. And then you get deluged, and that itself, that kind of fire-water combination is rough. Then you got winter, which is also problematic. If you're equatorial, you feel it less, but if the more north you get, the more painful winter becomes. And what joins summer and winter together is autumn. And so in cultures all over the world, in the autumn time, you harvest grains specifically that grow during the summer months, and you store them, and those grains keep you through winter when you can't grow much. You can grow some things in the wintertime, but lots of stuff doesn't. Potatoes grow okay during the wintertime. They grow underground, but lots of stuff does not grow well during the wintertime. And it's a problem. If you don't store up enough food, then you don't survive the wintertime. It's not like it is here where we have so much light pollution that it's almost, you don't see the stars because there's so much light around you all the time. And then B, you don't really depend on the light of the moon or the stars to be able to see because you have so much just light surrounding you and light pollution surrounding you. But in other parts of the world, or if you go out in the desert and it's a dark moon night, you can't see anything. And if it's a full moon night, it's far out. You can see everything. The light of the moon is substantial when it's not competing with light pollution. And so to some extent, we live, especially in Southern California, somewhat aloof from the four seasons, and we also live somewhat aloof from the lunar cycle. Things like the tides remind us that the lunar cycle is still there. If you look up in the sky, you can notice it. And, we wear like light jackets sometimes in the wintertime, or not. Half the people here are wearing t-shirts, and the other half are wearing light jackets. It almost seems like it's more a matter of personal preference than it is a requirement. When it gets really cold here, then maybe you need to wear socks and a jacket. And that's like, now you're complaining about we're in the bowels of winter, Maybe it rained a couple of days. It rained yesterday for an hour, and I was in total anxiety. I had to like self-soothe to get through it. But the world was set up to have seasons and a day-night cycle, which we can't get around that. I mean, some people do. But the day-night cycle, the circadian rhythms, the seasons, the lunar cycle, these are powerful forces of nature that we do well to live in accord with. Even though we can eke out an existence without them, it's better when you notice them. So, harvesting grains that grow during the summertime, storing them in your silo, preparing for the winter months so that you make it through to the spring, is something that all cultures have acknowledged from time immemorial. And despite us becoming detached enough from nature to some extent, at least not consciously attached to nature, we're still all dependent on nature, but maybe we're not consciously aware of it. Despite that, these things go on, and certainly when our festivals were created or as they began to be celebrated, these things were universally acknowledged and people were consciously aware of them. So you have your Mid-Autumn Festival in China. You've got Thanksgiving here. You've got Canadian Thanksgiving, which was just a few weeks ago. You've got the month of Kartik. These are all autumnal festivals. And they share that theme of celebrating the bounty that you've received, also by grace, also by the natural rhythm of things, the rain that pours down, the sun. Photosynthesis is totally miraculous if you think about it. There's a random seed, you throw it in the ground, and then you pour water on it, or maybe you don't even pour water on it. Water just pours on it naturally through the water cycle, which itself is totally far out. There's a massive transportation system that desalinates the ocean water, something we can't even figure out how to do, and then carries it up to mountaintops and then rains it down and freezes it and then thaws that out so then it then rolls down and covers all the land and regenerates and rejuvenates and wets the land so that crops can grow. You throw a seed in the ground, it rains on it, and all of a sudden there's a beautiful persimmon tree grows. I was up in the Bay Area yesterday, and the person who was hosting us had an orchard, and in the orchard he had persimmon trees. And we picked persimmons off the tree and ate them right there on the spot. And they were, it's... You ever had a good persimmon? Yeah. It's like jam, but in its own edible package. So it's almost like Jell-O or jam, And it's got its own package on it, so it's transportable. It's not messy. You bite into it, and it's like you're biting into the best preserves you could ever imagine, but even better because it's totally gelatinous. And so it's got this natural, it's like natural Jell-O. Like, how do you get that, right? Jell-O by its very existence is unnatural. It feels unnatural. It's kind of kiddie food. But then somehow it has that gelatinous, amazing feature combined with the natural sun-kissed je ne sais quoi. Can't quite figure out that flavor of a persimmon. It's like it's an apricot or a peach or like a mango. What is it? Some kind of composite of all the best flavors of fruit that you could ever imagine. And so the rain grows down, the seed comes up, and how's that work? And then there's another tree next to it, and that's the jujube tree. He also had jujubes. And then we were eating those. That was like a date-apple hybrid, the love child of a date and an apple. That was amazing. And all this stuff is just seeds, somehow or other, and water that we also don't create from rain. And, hey, Shri, I'm looking at you, and I don't want to. Get rid of yourself, and put me on the screen. Figure out how to do that. So we live in a mystical, magical world if we slow down and stop for a second and look around. And the day-night diurnal thing, and the circadian rhythms of life, and the lunar cycle, and the tides. I mean, even the whole menstrual cycle is just absolutely miraculous. How human beings and other life forms reproduce. The whole male-female dichotomy is miraculous. How all pervasive it is, how flowers reproduce, the whole thing. We live in it like a really far out world. And so old cultures generally tended to be more in tune with that, and to some extent, like prisoners or like people who go to Las Vegas and gamble, we live in a light pollution world where there's no clocks in the walls and you can get anything at any time. You don't have to save anything, and we can be gluttonous, and you can be exploitative, and you can be have no impulse control. Even in terms of like reproduction and sex, it used to be, still is in some small circles of the world, if you wanted to have sex, you would find yourself a spouse, make a lifelong commitment, and be together in good times and bad, rich and poor, for better or for worse, and then you would turn that into something beautiful. Whereas nowadays, it's treated as such a tawdry thing and such a cheap thing in most people's eyes. Much to people's chagrin. You get a bunch of broken hearts, and you get your mind all twisted up, and it becomes a problem for so many people. You got to go back, jack, and do it again, and start all over 2, 3, 4 times. That becomes problematic. Children who are raised from divorced parents score ridiculously high on every metric for every bad thing you can imagine. Your parents are divorced, you're more likely to get a heart attack, go to prison, commit a violent crime, OD, have a mental illness, etc., etc. Everything you can possibly think of. You look at people who are the children of divorced parents, and they score worse than everybody else. Almost mystically so. Anyway, the month of Damodar, the month of Kartik, is in many ways just our version of an autumn festival. And Govardhan Puja, Diwali, is the end of the Hindu year. Margashirsh, the following month, is the first month in the Vedic calendar and the Hindu calendar, and so they celebrate January in November, December, and just coming up, and this is the last month of the year. And I think just even on that basis, there's value in looking at Kartik as that, as the autumnal end of the year, as a time to rejoice and thank nature and the divine for the bounty that we find. But just like every tradition, we have what makes us special. We have the things that are special about our tradition, which are unique. Ishwar, are you okay? Where do you want to sit? You want to sit here? Yeah, come. Can you move this stuff? Yeah, of course. You come sit here, no problem. We'll move this for you. You come and sit. That's where he's sitting. I like him to sit by me too. How old are you, Ishwar?
83.
Huh?
He's 83.
83.
He just had a knee replacement.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
They say, where does the 800-pound gorilla sit? Anywhere it wants. So where does an 83-year-old venerable Vaishnava sit? Anywhere he pleases. Of course.
I saw Prabhupada. I didn't take any initiation. I saw Prabhupada in New York.
1976.
Yeah, I wrote an article on that one.
Ishwar Puri met Srila Prabhupada in the mid-70s when Prabhupada was here. He would have been a young man at the time, so we're talking 50 years ago. So he would have been in his early 30s and had just come to the U.S. and he met Prabhupada. So, although there are many things that our autumn months have in common with other traditions' autumn months, and our celebrations have in common with other traditions, and although there's probably a whole class worth of valuable lessons that you could learn just by looking at the secular cycle of the seasons and the cycle of life and the natural rhythms of the planet and the water cycle and photosynthesis and reproduction, and you can really actually get something out of that, and light pollution and how to mold your life better in consonance with and in accord with the rhythms of the world. Although you could do that and get a whole class worth of really valuable stuff out of that, that's not the only thing that this month is for us. And so if you want to understand this month, the month of Damodar, the easiest way to understand is by looking at the word Damodar that gives the name its month on our calendar. Damodar is a compound of two Sanskrit words, Dhamma and Udara. Udara means abdomen. Udara is where you get the English word udder from. It comes from the same Sanskrit root. That's why it sounds alike. Udder, udara, they're cognate terms. Dhamma means to bind or curb or control. So Damodar literally means control abdomen, but it's what's called a bahuvrihi samas. It's a Sanskrit compound, which means you're talking about the person who has that quality. Just like you can say, the red coats are coming, and nobody imagines that there's a rack of red coats rolling down the street. Rather, we understand that people who are wearing red coats, namely the British Army, the traditional outfit of the British Army, we understand that they're coming. Or the New Zealand rugby team is called the Black Shirts. But when you hear the Black Shirts are playing, you don't think, I think they're called the All Black. I just call them Black Shirts. Whatever. There you go. You don't think that there's like a pot of ink out there, like of all black ink. You rather think there's people dressed in all black. So it's a type of compound word. We use that in English. They have it in Sanskrit also. It's called a bahuvrihi samas. And so it means the person who has that quality. So pitambar. Pitambar means yellow dress. But pitambar is a name for Krishna, who wears a yellow dress. And so we call him pitambar. So Damodar literally means bound belly. But what it means for us is the person whose belly is bound. And the person whose belly is bound is Krishna. Do you need help?
No, it's okay.
You okay?
I moved it.
You want to put it down here?
Yes, okay.
It's okay? All right.
With my shawl.
No problem. Do whatever you want, Prabhu. Happy to have you. Yeah, so Damodar is the person who's bound around his belly with a rope, and that's Krishna. And that's a name we have for Krishna, and that name of Krishna and how Krishna got that name is really the special feature of this month for our tradition. Many of the things in this month are common to different religious traditions around the world, or even just different communities around the world, because of the natural feature of the autumn months and what it means for any agrarian society. And I actually think those things have incredible value, and they should be thought about. They don't need to be skipped over. At the same time, there is something special about this month. And the special thing about this month is it celebrates Krishna as Damodar. Now, to appreciate Krishna as Damodar, you have to understand, I think, just sort of one basic concept. And it's a big one. It's a big concept that you have to understand. And it's a bit of a Rosetta Stone for understanding our peculiar tradition, our unique, exciting religious tradition. And that is the concept of Yoga Maya. Yoga Maya. Maya means illusion. It means power also. It's used in a variety of contexts. It could be a suffix to a word also. But anyway, Maya, long ah, in this context means illusion. Or maybe even better, illusory power. And it's the illusory power that does yoga. What does yoga mean? Yoga derives from the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to join. That's where you get the word yoke from in English, because you yoke an animal to a cart with a yoke, and it joins the animal to the cart. When the animal moves, the cart moves. And so that word also comes from the same root yuj. It's an old Proto-Indo-European root, Sanskrit root. The oldest existence of that root we found is in the Sanskrit language, but it's also there in European languages. So they posit there was a Proto-Indo-European root that then branched off at some point from the Central Asian plateaus. And so yoga means to unite or to bring things together. So we have the illusion that brings things together, would be a literal translation of Yoga Maya. The illusion that allows for things to come together. So as soon as you say things come together, you then ask what things are coming together and how are they brought together? Like if you say a man and a woman united, you might ask, does that mean sex? Does that mean marriage? Like, in what sense did they unite? Did they unite legally in marriage? Did they unite physically in intercourse? If you say the United States of America, how are the states independent of one another? How are they united together? What things tie them together? How is it different than Canada and the U.S.? How are they separate? How are they united? And whenever you speak of a union, is it an absolute union? Is it a union where A becomes B and there's no difference and you can apply transitive logic? Or are there some ways in which something is united and some ways in which the thing is remaining distinct? Do you guys follow this? This is what, like if you were logically trying to think through what union means, you think what two things are being united, two people or two things, whatever, two items, and then what constitutes that union? So there's a concept in our tradition called Yoga Maya, and it is the illusion, the power of illusion that brings things together. So we have an illusion. People don't think about their mortality. Most of us live our life without spending a lot of time thinking about our mortality. We all know we're going to die. Kind of. Like if somebody asks you, you'd be an idiot to say you don't know you're going to die. But if you look at the way most people live their lives, it really seems as though they're not deeply aware of their mortality. People take all kinds of foolish risks. They don't plan for the future. If you got an apartment for free for a year or a big mansion for free for a year, but at the end of the year you had to move out, you probably enjoy the first few months there, but then you would start to think about how you were going to move and get your act together so you didn't get kicked out. You wouldn't just throw a party on the last night and try to eke out a few extra minutes before you were removed from the premises. That would be foolish. But I think if you look at the way most people live their lives, they kind of have that party mentality towards their existence in this world. And it's tough. Youth really acts as your enemy because it seems like you've got all the time in the world. And then, in your youth, you get addicted to all sorts of sensual pleasures which bind you to your body. Then you get older and your senses become weakened and incapable of reciprocating with you like they once used to. But then by then you're too addicted to figure anything else out. And so you end up, kind of in a pathetic way, hanging on to the last vestiges of your youth as your sensual power wanes, and we call that old age, which essentially is the disintegration of your body while you still occupy it. Kind of like if your car begins to die, and so you just end up, just rolling down hills and pushing it and just trying to figure something out, instead of stepping out of it and letting go and moving forward. So there are certain illusions we have that are pernicious and prevalent, and they really sink their teeth into you. And it's hard to shake them loose. And most people are quite addicted to sensual pleasure that does not long endure and requires repeat performances again and again and again, usually with diminishing returns. But there's another kind of illusion, which is the one we're talking about today. Our tradition places a premium on loving God intimately. Intimate love of God is subversive. Generally speaking, when people think about God, they think about a powerful deity. And you supplicate to that deity and ask for things like your daily bread, or to be forgiven for your trespasses, or whatever the case may be. You ask for stuff. God is ultimately a parent, hopefully a benevolent parent, not always a benevolent parent. There's a lot of fear in the way people relate to God. There's probably fear in the way all of us relate to God as well. We think we have to do the right thing or behave properly, and if we don't, bad things will ensue. Fear is a great motivator for immoral people. You want to get immoral people to behave morally, then you punish them for behaving immorally. In fact, civilization really boils down to a punitive system of justice which is designed to force people to not exploit the more defenseless members of society, usually women and children in a traditional society. And so you have to have armed thugs roaming the streets, that's your police force, who are given the power of wielding violence if people don't agree to treat the weaker members of society with respect. And when I say weaker members of society, I'm happy to admit that women are smarter than men, are better at men than everything on the planet. They have the miraculous ability to reproduce. They lactate. They're like goddesses walking the face of the earth. These like miracle workers walking the face of the earth. But there is one way in which women lack compared to men, and that's in upper body strength. Because the ability to lactate comes at a steep price. You don't have the same upper body strength, which is why men, and upper body strength is a lot of what goes into violence. Human beings don't really fight with their feet so much. They generally fight with their hands. We're quite well adapted to fighting with our hands. You can grab stuff with your hands. We have a lot more dexterity in our fingers than we do in our toes. You can train it. Train to be able to grab a door handle with your foot and use your feet like hands, but most of us haven't done that, and so upper body strength equates to capacity for violence, which is why we have to separate people in prisons, because if we didn't, bad things would happen. So when I say weaker members of society, I don't mean that in some sort of dismissive way. I literally mean physically weaker in terms of brute strength. And so a civilization is a system of punitive justice where you arm people, come up with a set of rules, and then punish people for not following them. And you could imagine, for instance, if traffic laws were traffic guidelines in Southern California, for instance. If you didn't have to stop at a red light, and you could go any speed you wanted to on the freeway. Now, the Autobahn might, dispute this. The German government might dispute this, but I think in general, some degree of traffic laws is critical. And if they became guidelines, people wouldn't follow them at all. And if there were no traffic rules and it was just traffic guidelines, the world would look like India. Now, I do see India is beginning to enforce traffic laws, but at least when I first lived in India in the early 90s, there were no real traffic laws in India. People just drove. It's actually amazing to watch. If you get a drone camera and you look down at a busy Indian intersection, it's totally wild to watch what happens. Like tons of cars drive, like at a circle, right? At a circle, tons of cars driving, and like a ton of cars breaks in, then they slam on their brakes, like a ton of other cars breaks in, and it's a free for all.
Everybody's holding the horn down. That's a prerequisite.
Yeah, in the U.S., if you put your hand on the horn, it means that like there's serious problems. It's like you're about to get in a fight or you're going to call the police. Like you lean on the horn, it's no joke. Most trucks in India have it says horn please. And people take it seriously, and everybody's leaning on their horn the whole time. I'm imagining horns wear out. I never experienced that with any of the cars I've ever driven, but I'm assuming at some point horns wear out, and I bet you there's a whole market for aftermarket horns in India because horns are wearing out left and right because everybody's using them all day. Anyway, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on tangents, but punitive justice is actually required for civilization to exist and people not to get exploited. But it really has limits. Like if your relationship is based on fear and punishment, say a marriage based solely on fear, and you were faithful to each other because you're afraid you're going to kill each other if you weren't, or something like that, and there was no love and no trust, you can imagine ridiculous limitations and stress and trauma that such a relationship based solely on fear would provide. So fear is a great motivator in the beginning with low-class people to make them follow the basic rules of civilization. But in terms of like long, enduring relationships and powerful, transformative relationships, fear has serious limitations. And love trumps it across the board for all time. When you love somebody, you do the right thing just because. Even when nobody's looking. Even when you get no credit for it. Even when you get away with doing something else, you still do the right thing. Love goes so much further than fear. But generally speaking, even a loving relationship with the deity, which most of us probably don't have a pure loving relationship with the deity. We're still afraid of karma, and are we going to get our karma, and are things going to work out? We don't really trust in the divine. Functionally, I think most people, even if they are externally religious, functionally, I think most people live in a very atheistic world, where you got to do everything by the sweat off your own back. But even if you do deeply believe in God, and you believe in a loving relationship with deity, piety facilitates this, by the way. If you're really pious, you have a lot less fear because you're doing a lot less stuff that you deserve to be punished for. If you're always committing crimes, then you're always afraid it's going to catch up with you. But if you never do anything that's wrong, and you're always doing the best thing, even when people aren't looking, then you're not afraid of some, justice of the peace coming out of nowhere and punishing you, and you live with a lot less fear in your life. Even if you get to a love-based relationship, it's generally a formal relationship of love, where God is your parent and you're asking for stuff. It's kind of insulting to God. It's kind of insulting to ask for stuff all the time. You got this omniscient being, but you got to tell him what you want on the daily. I think probably there's some sense in which you relate to God as a parent. And what it really means is you're afraid of God. And you're afraid God's not. Maybe God's all powerful, he's not necessarily all good. And so you got to ask for stuff and supplicate and propitiate and offer gifts. So I think probably there's still some fear in there. But anyway, let's just say, for argument's sake, you get to a pure love-based but formal relationship. Formality, really attenuates love. Formality is really the enemy of profound love. Literally, it's the enemy of intimacy. But I think we could also just as easily say it's the enemy of profound love. And so, profound love means you stop asking for stuff and you start reciprocating. And so formal love facilitates more of a unidirectional thing. Maybe the reciprocation is you ask for stuff and God provides. Maybe you ask for world peace and stuff like that. You figure out a way to make it a little less selfish. You ask for your children. And then when people criticize you for having extended narcissism, you ask for your community. And then when people accuse you of being a nationalist, you ask for the whole planet. You kind of try to get to. Then they accuse you of being speciest, and you ask for all forms of life. But then pretty soon you're like praying for nothing. You're kind of unfulfilled because there's nothing in it for you anymore. You're making these vague prayers for the benefit of all things, and you become a small fry in the equation. And usually our prayers aren't like that. They're way more specific to what we're going through. Reciprocal love, by its very definition, isn't formal. Because if you're capable of reciprocating, there's some equality between you and the person you love. If you think about it hard enough, to really reciprocate means there's something you have in common with the person, means there's more equality, means you're capable of giving something back to the relationship, means there's less formality and there's more intimacy. And the more profound the reciprocation, the more intimacy that exists, until eventually there's no room for power differentials because it blocks a real relationship. This is why doctors can't sleep with their patients, and therapists can't sleep with their clients, and bosses aren't supposed to sleep with their employees, because there's a sense in which power differentials make a relationship uneven and unequal, and therefore you have to navigate around that and be careful. And you really want to find a partner who's your equal, who compliments you, can give something back to you, who brings value to you in a mutualistic way, in a symbiotic mutualistic way. But how do you do that with a singularity like God, where there's so much difference? How do we do that? Well, you can't, because you're an ant and God is the greatest American hero. It's a TV show from the 80s. And so we are microscopic and subatomic, and God is infinite. We're infinitesimal. We're so small. Even if we're qualitatively one with God, we're like sparks to an unlimited fire, infinitesimally small and atomic, albeit of the same spiritual nature. But where's really the capacity for profound reciprocation? There isn't. In steps Yoga Maya. Yoga Maya is what happens to our devotees that allows them to forget that Krishna is God so they can fall madly in love with Krishna. And Yoga Maya is the all-pervasive gravitational force that exists in our conception of heaven. In our conception of heaven, essentially is an Indian village, an agrarian village, and Krishna is your family member. And you're in love with Krishna, and he's your family member, and you forget he's God. And you just love him like your best friend, or your lover, or even your child. Generally speaking, nobody in Vrindavan loves Krishna as their parent. That relationship's absent because it's too unidirectional and it's too asking what's in it for you. Selfless love means you either love Krishna as your friend or your lover, which are relationships of equals, either with a romantic or without a romantic element, platonic or romantic love, but amongst equals. Or you love God in a parental way, but you're the parent and God's your child. That's how we worship Krishna as a child. And so Yoga Maya, the necessity and the logic and the reasonableness of the idea of forgetting that Krishna is God to facilitate profound love and intimate exchanges with the Absolute, who fundamentally, ontologically is infinitely greater than us. It's the greatest hegemony conceivable. But yet, if that hegemony exists, then there's no profound love. And if profound love is valued and aspired for, then that hegemony, that power differential, needs to dissipate. And if it can't dissipate in reality, it has to dissipate in illusion. Hence Yoga Maya, that brings the devotees together in rapturous union with the Absolute, with God. Yoga Maya brings us together into a romantic, loving, familial union with the divine. Here's what that Yoga Maya looks like in our tradition for thousands of years. One day, Krishna's mother. Now, how could Krishna have a mother? God's the mother and father of the universe. Krishna says in the Gita, Pitaham asya jagato mata. I'm the mother and father of the universe. How can Krishna have a mother? Well, if you followed along with class, what you should really be asking is, how could Krishna not have a mother? How could Krishna not relish a loving relationship with a mother-like angelic figure? How could Krishna not also be the mother of the universe? How could both things not exist? And which one would be tastier and more deep? Krishna being loved like a child by his mother. So what do you got? You have a spiritual world where everything is made out of Sat and Ananda. Everything's made out of eternality, bliss, and knowledge. And in that world, there's an angel who exists in a form of eternity. And she is the personification of parental love for Krishna, and she is the personification of motherhood. And motherhood and motherly love has a form, and that form's name is Yashoda. She is the personification. If you see the derivative quality of motherly love, it's derivative because Yashoda is the genesis of that quality. There's a personal genesis to that quality. It's Yashoda. And the derivative quality that adheres in various people you might meet or that you may feel from time to time is because you're participating in some microscopic way the person of Yashoda. Do you guys follow that? We're moving faster now. We're jogging. We've been crawling, now we're jogging. So, let's pay attention. Yashoda has a problem. She thinks that all the other mothers to Krishna, all the other ladies in the village who love Krishna like their child, they don't do a good job of making butter. Making butter is no joke. You don't go to the store and buy butter. That's not butter. It's like some weird yellow stuff. It should might as well be red because it comes from the dairy industry. Real butter, you keep cows. You never kill them. Those cows produce way more milk than they could possibly drink themselves, and you drink some of that milk. And the cow's your mother. You take care of the cow takes care of you. You live in a symbiotic, mutualistic world. Somehow or other, cows are this weird thing where they produce way more milk than they need, and human beings produce lactase into adulthood. Totally bizarre. No other animals do that. We can digest lactose into adulthood. We also work with fire, so we can remove the lactose in things like yogurt. We can't eat the grass, but the cows do. They turn that grass into this like perfect 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio, easily digestible milk, especially in a raw form with all the natural bacteria. You can drink that, no harm is made. And why do you drink the lactation of another animal? Because lots of animals do. Just watch the Nature Channel. No animals drink the lactation of another animal. Totally false. And anyway, we're unique in lots of ways. We fly in planes and drive in cars and cook our food. How come you're not coming around about those things and running around like an ape man? All of a sudden you get real natural when it comes to dairy. Anyway, so this temple, at our temple, we offer milk to Krishna every day. That milk is from our own cows. We never offer blood milk. We never offer milk from the store. All that milk comes from our cows. Those cows live their entire life protected and taken care of long after they dry up because we are beyond veganism. We don't just walk away from animals. We live mutualistically with them in harmony so they benefit and we benefit. Anyway, so Yashoda thinks all these cowherd ladies, they don't know how to make butter. You really want to make butter? You got to milk the cow. Then you got to turn that milk into yogurt. That's a whole saga. Turning milk into yogurt's a whole thing. You got to heat it up below the boiling point. Then add culture. And then you got to store it overnight. You got to get really good at it. And you can make this, amazing thick yogurt. In India, they make yogurt out of buffalo milk because the buffalo milk has a higher cream content. You can also make it out of cow milk, but you got to get cows that have a high cream content, like Gyr cows have a high cream content, and Jersey cows have a high butterfat content, milk fat content. So you got to make yogurt. Then you churn the yogurt in an old world churn. It's like a cylindrical device. You put the yogurt in that, and then you have a stem, and you do this. Now you have a rope too. And you churn it, and it churns into makhan, freshly made butter. And it's like out of this world. If you ever get fresh made butter, you can actually just eat butter. Like I would never eat like a block of butter. I would never do that. But makhan, you can actually just eat it raw. It's amazing. So Yashoda decides, I can't trust all these women. They're lazy. They don't do it right. They use a spinning device. What do you call that? It's the way butter's made in this country. They use a spinning device. I can't remember what it's called. Anybody? Okay, anyway. So she thinks, they don't know how to do it, they don't do it right. So she's decided she's going to make butter for Krishna every day forever, make all of his milk sweets herself, cook everything he ever eats herself, because she knows what Krishna likes and she wants his son to be taken care of. And so she's churning butter. And while she churns butter, she sings songs about Krishna and feels great ecstatic joy. And Krishna wakes up and comes out to meet his mother. So the Supreme Lord, the one without a second, the cause of all causes, wakes up in the morning in heaven and comes out to see his mother. And what does she do? She puts the churning rod down. Krishna actually comes up and grabs the churning rod, like to stop her, and then looks up at her with his doe eyes. And Yashoda picks him up, puts him on her lap, and breastfeeds him. So she's churning butter for Krishna, and she's feeding Krishna. Mother Yashoda's breasts are always wet with breast milk because she's so in love with Krishna and parental love that she's just spontaneously lactating at all times. And Krishna's drinking, and she's looking at Krishna, and Krishna looks like liquefied blue crystals. His body is like so beautiful. And he looks like a cluster of blue lotuses the next moment. And she's just in love with her son, in motherly love with her son, loves him more than you could ever imagine, and her motherly love expands without limit because it's found an unlimited object to repose itself in, and there's no limit to what you can do when you start loving Krishna as your child. And then the milk starts boiling over on the stove. And Yashoda puts Krishna down, which is inconceivable. But she puts Krishna down because the milk is boiling over and she wants to make sure that Krishna is nourished and taken care of. And so she goes to tend to the milk so she can make nice things so Krishna can be taken care of. And Krishna starts crying because he's angry at his mom for neglecting him. Because Krishna's hungry for our love. It's the one thing you can give to God that he doesn't have is your love. And so Krishna breaks the pot, the clay pot that the yogurt is being turned to butter in. He breaks the pot. And then he runs away. And Yashoda finishes doing her duties, comes back, sees Krishna's gone, sees the broken pot, puts her finger on her nose, starts laughing, and sees these little tiny lotus-like feet prints smeared with yogurt running away from the scene of the crime. And she hears Krishna's ankle bells, and he wears a belly around his waist too, jingling, and she knows Krishna's gone in the other room. And so then she follows him. Now Krishna's gone in the other room where they stored the dairy products from the previous day. And he's stolen them. There's a pot of, yesterday's butter that was hanging up. You hang stuff so that animals can't get to it. And so he got that pot, and he took that and he went outside and he sat on top of a mortar, a large grain grinding mortar, big mortar, and he was feeding it to the monkeys and to his friends. And Yashoda sees him out of the window. She cranes her neck up and she sees him out of the window. And Krishna's sitting on top of a grinding mortar, passing out butter to the monkeys and to his friends, looking around to make sure his mom doesn't catch him, and finding his path of egress in case she does come out, how he's going to run away. And Yashoda decides she has to go out to safeguard her son because he's out all alone. And so she sneaks up on him from behind. And Krishna spots her. And he kind of clumsily gets down from the grinding mortar because he's a small child. And he starts running away. But he's small. He's trying to run away. And Yashoda's thinking, I need to chastise my son so he'll learn. Also, I don't want him to run away and something to happen to him. And also just like, I love him so much, I need to bring him back home. And so she runs after him. And she catches Krishna. The Supreme Being who runs fast at the speed of the mind, who can attain anything, who can go anywhere, who can do anything, is caught by love. And Yashoda's got a stick in her hand. And she's holding Krishna's hand, and she's got the stick, saying, I'm going to hit you. She's not. She's just standing there. And Krishna's crying. He's saying, don't hit me. I promise I won't do this again. He's trying to negotiate with her. Please put the stick down. Then she starts getting worried. Maybe my son will run away from home. So she throws the stick away. But then she decides, I'm going to tie Krishna up. And so she gets a rope. And she ties Krishna to the grinding mortar. But she can't tie the rope. It won't tie. It won't complete. Krishna's small. His belly is the size of a fist. But somehow or other Yashoda can't wrap a massive rope around his belly and tie it. Because Krishna's infinite. No one can tie Krishna. So Yashoda starts getting other ropes. And she decides, no matter what happens, I'm going to tie Krishna. But no matter how many ropes she gets, it's always 2 fingers too short. Multiple ropes. By this time, she's sweating and perspiring. Her hair's come undone. Her comb fell out of her hair. Malati flowers are falling from her hair. She's perspiring. She's exhausted. She's laughing. All the other elder village ladies are also laughing. And it's like this great, beautiful pastime of parental, motherly love for God, where he's the center of attraction and everybody loves him like their own child. And they're all in great ecstasy. But the nature of motherly love is you feel like you have to protect your child, and Yashoda feels like she has to do the right thing. And so finally she's able to bind Krishna. Because her motherly love overwhelms Krishna's omnipotence, and the infinite Supreme Lord becomes bound by love. The yogis are trying to catch Krishna and enter into Brahman, but they can't do it. But Yashoda did catch Krishna. Krishna's totally beyond hunger and thirst, but he's hungry for Mother Yashoda's love. All of his desires are instantly fulfilled, but he eagerly hankers for loving exchanges with his mother. Krishna controls everything, but yet he himself is controlled by love, and a God who wasn't controlled by love wouldn't actually be a God worth worshiping. If love didn't have the power to bind Krishna, then Krishna wouldn't be capable of love, because love, by its very definition, means vulnerability. It means reciprocation. Reciprocation means relativity. It means you're affected by other people. And so Krishna, being incapable of being conquered by love, would actually be a deficient automaton deity, not worth worshiping. And then we have verses like this. Nacha anta na bahir yasya. The person who has no beginning and no end. No outside, no inside. Na purvam na api cha aparam. He has no beginning and end. He has no past and future. He has no inside and outside. Purva aparam bahischa anta jagato ya jagat cha yaha. But he himself is the beginning, middle, and end, past, present, and future, inside and outside of the universe. He is the creator of all things. The person who himself is beyond all those things, but yet himself is the creator of those things for everyone else. You guys following this? Tam matva atmajan avyaktam. That unmanifested, unknowable, unattainable, unseeable Supreme Lord, who's a hoksaja, who's beyond the senses, who's a vyakta, who's unmanifested. That Lord who is beyond your capability of ever being able to achieve of your own volition by building a stairway to heaven. The Supreme Being who's beyond all things of this world and is therefore beyond what you could ever hope to achieve. That Supreme Lord, Adhoksaja Avyakta, Martya Lingam Tam Matva Atmajam Gopika. Thinking of that Supreme Lord like her own son. Yashoda, thinking of that Supreme Lord like her own son. Damna Babanda Prakritam Yataha. She bound him just like an ordinary child to the grinding mortar. The Supreme Lord who has no inside, no outside, no beginning, no end, but yet himself is the beginning and end of all things, and the inside and outside of all things, and the creator of all things. That Supreme Lord who's unknowable, unmanifested, unattainable, unthinkable, inconceivable. That Supreme Lord, by being thought of as her own son, Yashoda bound that Lord. That's Damodar. Krishna who's bound around the belly. Bound with love, bound with love. Bound with what? Bound with love. The unknown becomes knowable. The unlovable becomes lovable. The unseeable becomes seen. The unembraceable, untouchable becomes embraced. The inconceivable becomes your family member. That's Vrindavan. That's Yoga Maya. That's what's celebrated this month. And so as the autumn rolls around and we thank the Lord for the bounties that we've gotten, and that we're going to make it through another winter, and we connect ourselves with our old tradition and the old ways of the world and the rhythms and the cycles of the planet, we also celebrate this unique, miraculous facet of our tradition, that we aspire to love God like our child, with that level of intimacy. How can you do it? You can't do it, but Krishna steps in to help out as Yoga Maya. And the amazing thing is that Krishna himself becomes influenced by that Yoga Maya. And although Yoga Maya comes from Krishna, Krishna himself wanders around Vrindavan thinking he's Yashoda's son. It's not play for him either. He also relishes that relationship. And so most people think of God in formal terms, as being big, you're small, he's got everything, you've got nothing, you got to pray for stuff, got to pray to forgive your sins. It's a fear-based relationship, it's a power-based relationship. You're looking for stuff, you're trying to stack the deck in your favor, you offer a little ritual, you try to figure it out, navigate it. That's the way it is for most people. And our subversive, radical, unusual, postmodern, wild, and crazy tradition just goes against the grain on all points. Don't ask for anything. Don't think of God as your parent. Think of God as your child. Don't ask what God you can do for you. Ask what you can do for Krishna. Love Krishna so intensely that all formality melts away, and pretty soon you're embracing the Supreme Lord as your best friend, and Krishna's embracing you back that way. And that's the purpose of life. That's why we have the capacity for love. That's the perfection of all desire. That's why we're put on this planet. That's the ultimate lesson. That's the hero's journey for everybody. Everything else is just a side issue. That's the purpose of the amazing brains and power of thought we've been given, is we're able to conceive of and think about and cultivate these kinds of high notions towards our Maker. Okay, so we'll do a little kirtan now. Thank you very much.